We're gonna get started here in just a minute. We're gonna give everyone time to get in and get settled. All right, well, it is 2:01, so we will go ahead and get started. Hope everyone's having a great day. We are so glad that you're here with us to spend some time. Today, we're gonna be joined by Chad Luxenburg, the CEO of Scitrain. So really excited to have you, Chad, and thank you so much for being here. This is the second session in our Transformational Leadership webinar series. So if you weren't able to make the first, want to encourage you to visit our website and download that. It is available on demand. Then also we hope to see you at the same time next week for the final session in our series. So as you know, Avaap is an industry-focused cross-platform management and technology consulting firm. Our market-leading change management practice is powered by ProSci research, data, and concepts. And with offices across the US and around the world, we have deep expertise in education, government, healthcare, and manufacturing, among other industries. So we have a great session ahead, led by Avaap Vice President Dr. Shannan Simms. Dr. Simms has over 20 years of consulting experience in almost all industries, including federal and state government, nonprofit, higher education, and commercial sectors. So her advice and recommendations are rooted in a lot of practical experience. Before I hand it over to Shannan, I want to point out that if you have a question at any time during today's session, feel free to submit it using either the chat function or the Q&A box, and we will be sure to answer them at the end. And then finally, I want to let everyone know that everyone who registered for this webinar will receive an email with a link to view it on demand, as well as a link to register for the final session in our series. So let's get started, Shannan.
Great, Vanessa, thank you so much. Really appreciate that great intro. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Really transformational leadership, change leadership, big topics right now, as so many of us have been weathering just ongoing responses and reactions to a COVID-19 response kind of world. In our organizational resilience series back in January and February, we did some polling of our participants, and transformational leadership was one of the biggest areas that you identified that your organization could benefit from, greater attention. We're seeing that in work with our clients over the last 9 to 12 months. We're seeing and hearing more and more organizations kind of recognize the importance of deliberately investing in developing change leadership and transformational leadership skills. So our series last week, this week, and follow up when Chad and I come back next week to talk about just practical components around change leadership. So last week we started by talking about how driving and managing change is really a team sport, and everybody has a role to play in order for it to be successful, for those transformative initiatives to be successful. This week, we're going to get to spend some time with Chad. As Vanessa mentioned, he's the CEO of Scitrain. Scitrain is a strategic partner with Avaap, and they really focus on pretty innovative leadership development activities. And so wanted to bring Chad to come and share some thoughts and just chat about what the trends he's seeing in working with Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies, and kind of how folks are responding to the pandemic, and more specifically, even focusing on what some of the themes are that'll help us prepare for what's next. And so, Chad, I just really appreciate that you're joining us today to share our insights. I know that just to get started, I think one of the key elements about Scitrain that's always impressed me and really kind of stuck out is your mission and is your vision. And so for our folks who are just joining us, could you just share a little bit about what Scitrain does and the types of things you're inspired to support? What kind of gets you up in the morning?
Yeah, thank you. It's so nice to be here. Thanks for the introduction. We are a passionate organization, and we do believe that human beings have the inner drive to truly realize their true potential. Like anybody can do this. And I know growing up, we've heard of theory X and theory Y type people, but we think it's actually within anybody. But doing well means you have to develop skills. So what we have is a very strong ability to kind of work in a deeper way with people. And in that path of realizing their true potential, human beings really can kind of understand their obstacles and their challenges. And this is how we actually create breakthrough for their lives. And I would say for me, for what really gets me up in the morning is around being a catalyst. Like we get this feedback a lot, like, and I really love this idea that we're truly helping people and helping them to remove obstacles, because there are so many ways that you could just be kind of like going on autopilot through your life. It's such a busy life. There's so much going on, right? But how do you remove the blockers? How do you remove the fears and address what I truly need to learn? And actually even that creates like a redesign that can happen of your culture, and the culture happens one behavior at a time. We have this question all the time: how do we change our organizational culture to something different? It's about understanding what you want and really, working to do that. And actually then it creates a whole new ecosystem that, you can work with, but it does start with coaching. And so I love this coaching up, helping others to reach their full potential. And by facilitating a change like this, actually, essentially, you unlock this amazing productivity and creative potential within your organization. And it creates a positivity, actually. It creates positive for your employees and even for your organization and ultimately society. I am very passionate about what we do for the world and working with Avaap, as you are a top-notch organization.
So thank you for that. I appreciate that. So Vanessa, if we can maybe just take the slides down, because I have a couple questions, Chad, that I think will really help our folks. You have such an opportunity to work with senior leaders, leaders at all levels of organizations. And I think one of the things that strikes me about your development programs is how you set it up in a way that people get feedback in a non-threatening kind of environment. And I know you have spent a lot of time with organizations over the last year, really to help navigate leadership in a COVID world. So we know it's been an unprecedented year. And some other organizations, they've done better maybe than others in responding or bouncing forward into the challenges that are in front of them. I'm just curious to get your perspective on a couple things. How have you seen the response to COVID-19 impact the way leaders are leading? And what would you say the biggest lesson leaders are taking from their response to the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, I would say one of the things I'm seeing is that there's this safe zone that I've noticed in the past. We've been doing this for just over 18 years. And people a lot of times have a choice to make, like, do I stay in this safe zone or do I leave my safe zone? And we all know when we've been out of our safe zone in the past, because you feel it. You may even want to run screaming from the situation that you're in and go back to, for example, a job that you're quite comfortable with. And what actually has happened lately is people have been pushed out of their safe zone, especially in 2020. And if you think of it like a target, like the center having a safe zone, and then you picture the next ring out being kind of like a learning zone, that's where the true learning happens, when you're forced to kind of step into that space. And a lot of people had to step into that space. Now there is a third ring, which is called a panic zone. And we had a number of phone calls and even coaching requests. And I hear others around the world that are having this coaching request because how do I handle this? What do I do? And so, it's about even reaching out for help to really understand, because a lot of times the way we were raised is when you're the leader, you have the answers, or you should have the answers. But the day of like, I'm the woman or I'm the man, I have all the answers, stand up behind me, are kind of over. And I've even had several CEOs reach out to me and say they don't understand, even like they're frustrated with the engagement of the people around them because there's certain fears starting to creep in last year that people had to deal with.
And there was something about last year that so many of us were put into circumstances that we just didn't have, leaders just didn't have an experience, right? We didn't have something in our arsenal. Oh yeah, we, experienced this back in 1982, and I'm just going to pull on those lessons that I, that I learned and apply them in this circumstance, right? So I think leaders were challenged to really have to be very agile. I like how you kind of described that as that learning zone, right? What do you think what do you think the biggest lesson that leaders are taking from last year?
Well, I would say they had a lot of learning that went on because a lot of confusion set in on two levels. One, the leaders actually had to think, and we heard this in multiple areas, and this was global even, the confusion set in around like, how do I lead these people actually? And they're actually in new physical environments, even like, what do I do with that? What they were wondering, oh, my people aren't right here right now. And in 2018, I had a woman CEO who contacted me and said, hey, I'm thinking about taking out my entire call center and having them work remote. What do you think? And so we worked through that, but there was some concerns, and I've had multiple phone calls like this with several other people. And that was a little bit of a challenge for them that they had to deal with. And for team members, actually the workforce, in a lot of ways, people kind of really like this new physical environment that they were working in, and even working from home. And it even unlocked some unnecessary frustration from the past. Like, could I work from home? Could I not work from home? And, to think about, you have a little child who's not feeling well, and you suddenly had them show up on the knee of an executive. I actually saw some of this go on. So this was all a bit of a shock, a bit of a change for people. And it really challenged the way people had to think, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
Personal experience, right? Definitely changes how we think about humanizing in a remote environment. How I was on a call the other day with a client, and as soon as I started talking, the cat space showed up right in the camera, right? So we're all a little bit more gracious for some of those nuances that happen when you're in a remote environment.
Yeah, I would say too, it's interesting. Like, I noticed that people at the level of the workforce and the team members were constantly scanning for threats, right? Because they don't know, they have family members who even, were affected by COVID as well. And so what does this mean? And then they would like constantly scan for these threats. And then they see like this cat in the background of their boss, and it loosens everything up, and then they could handle it a bit more. So there was a lot of learning going on during that time.
Well, I think that COVID-19 just reminded us that disruption can come from anywhere at any time, right? And so a lot of organizations deliberately disrupt the organization, through things like acquisitions, mergers and acquisitions, through intentional growth plans, or you mentioned culture transformations. I know we worked with a large pharmaceutical company around changing the leadership mindset to a zero-based mindset, right? That's significant culture. We talk about data-driven culture, right? All those types of things. Roll out a new product, a new service to market. All those things bring disruption for organizations, right? Or it can happen to us, right? COVID-19, it was happening to us, and every week it felt like something new was happening to us. So from your perspective, what behaviors do you observe in leaders that successfully navigate this planned or this unplanned disruption? What do you think the biggest driver of success is based on your experience?
Well, I would definitely have to say it does come around some deeper reflection, and learning agility actually is being key here. And there's a key intersection between transformational leadership and change leadership, right? And I think we'll even talk a little bit about that next week. But what do I mean by learning agility? You know, it begins with this solid understanding. It's not necessarily just about experience, right? It's about what do I need? And so some of the latest cutting edge research that is used, there's several models around learning agility, but the one that we have used that's kind of tried and true that we really like a lot, it looks at things like grit, you know, when it looks at 4 main categories, grit being one, the Angela Duckworth work, and really understanding how do I show up. And grit is a little bit beyond, it's not just resilience, can I handle something, but can I line up the next day, put my shoulder into it and move that boulder day in and day out. And the second is really around emotional agility as well. The third around intellectual agility, and that's not like GPA or something like that, or intelligence tests. That's more how quick I can think in these days, these VUCA world days we're living in, to actually be that agile and really understand, or do I need several days to come up with a decision on something? When is 80% good enough to make a decision and move with it? And the fourth being around growth mindset, which is Carol Dweck's work out of Stanford, that I actually think I can do it. Like, so this, to really understand these 4 components within you, I think is a key factor in the biggest drivers of success that I've seen.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I think this concept of learning agility and being able to take what we've learned in one context and apply lessons in a completely different context is so valuable. And I think something that we probably all realized in the last year that maybe we need to focus a little attention on being a little bit more agile in our ability to learn.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Thank you for that.
That's key.
And I know we were just talking a little bit about change leadership, transformational leadership. You know, they're complementary skills. How do you differentiate between those 2 concepts?
Well, I mean, it's a great question, actually, because they get mixed up all the time, and sometimes people kind of use them interchangeably. But maybe we could talk about change leadership for a second first. There's a huge difference between change management and change leadership, for example. As we know, change management is more about stakeholders buying into a project, and even some people are more talking about change agility, because change management has this idea that there's this perfect sort of like thing that goes off a little project and everything's fine, everything works out fine, right? So on one extreme you have change management, but then you have change leadership, right? Change leadership is more about articulating the vision of and being part of the future, but it's still related to that change, right? And so it's about mobilizing resources needed. It's more the engine behind the change. And one thing I was thinking about just now that kind of cracked me up, my family and I, we actually have wanted a pontoon boat of all things. I know there's a ton of things you could want, but we always thought it'd be cool to have a pontoon boat. And so we actually got it and we put it out on the lake. But when we bought it, they gave us this little paddle with it. And I said, why do I need this paddle? There's an engine on the back, actually. Like, I don't understand why that's important. So they said, well, you never know. And I said, okay, that's comforting. So, you know, so I just pictured myself laying on my belly on the deck with this paddle trying to go. But sometimes change can feel like that if your engine isn't there and you're just moving in the water, and you know feel like you're alone trying to paddle along. And so, you know, change leadership is more about having somebody who's really the engine to put the whole process in movement more.
Yeah,
I would say. Now, if we go to transformational leadership, this actually is quite different. It's more of a philosophy. It's a little more holistic, but let's look at the scale on that one too. Like transactional leadership, when you think about transactional leadership being on the other side of that, and you think about Maslow's hierarchy, right? Transactional leadership is a little bit around like the bottom 3 layers of Maslow, where it's like, do we have enough to eat? You know, like, are we safe? Are we secure? And so leaders have to shift to more transactional leadership, when they have to come through crisis like last year. You know, you see a lot of people shifting to, okay, what are we going to do? Who's doing what? And it gets very much down to that. Now, the top of the pyramid, when you truly get to reaching your true potential, is at the top of the Maslow pyramid. That's transformational leadership there. And that's, you know, something that is very important. And when I see transformational leadership done in a very good way, which actually has elements in it like motivating, coaching, things like that, it's an extreme change. But you actually have to do the entire transformational leadership style, because a lot of times people even leave parts of it out.
Yeah. What do you, so basically my summary is change leadership, situation specific, transformational leadership, more a way of showing up as a leader, kind of day in and day out across everything, your day-to-day mundane kinds of things, or your big growth initiatives and everything in between. So as you think about successful leaders, you know, helping their organizations, what do they do to help equip their people for transitions, right? Whether it's something straightforward like, hey, we're rolling out a new time entry system, to something more significant like, hey, we plan to double. I'm thinking Gojo, right? Like,
yeah, totally.
big in the news up here in the Akron area, right? They have doubled because of the growth in their business over the last year, and that requires a different way of thinking about your operations. So what do successful leaders do to equip their people for these types of transitions?
Yeah, I mean, now this is where transitional leadership is very strong, actually, from what I've seen. And there's a model, actually, it was originally created by, I think, James Dalton in 73, and then it was written again in 78, and it was gussied up then. But it's basically based on what they call these 5 I's, or no, 4, there's 4 I's. And when you actually enact all of these, you can really equip the people for the transition from what I've seen. Maybe I'll just quickly go through all 4, if that's okay. I don't know if we have time.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, okay, so the first one is really, and it's no particular order here, but the first one is really around idealized influence, they call it. This is about being a role model, really, in the hard work, rolling up your sleeves, and kind of being there with the team that you're doing the work, and actually even sharing your ethical stance. What do you think? Which way are we going? And there was some harsh criticism on sometimes whenever even military leaders in the past have gone into different military things where they weren't with their troops, kind of. You've heard even people like talk about that and relate to that in the business world. But that's kind of what it meant, like this real strong role model, roll up our sleeves and do this. You know, we even saw this like during Katrina, when Katrina happened in New Orleans. The leaders of the nursing homes in New Orleans had a real problem because people were flooding. There was a lot of flooding going on, and they had to look after these people, and they weren't getting any help from the federal government. And so you saw these leaders, these administrators from nursing homes, like I'm still inspired by the story of like people rolling up their sleeves and just, you know, showing, being the lead, being the role model, be strong, right? So that's the first one. It's about influencing, right? The second one is really around inspirational motivation, sharing stories, even being able to appeal to an emotional sense with the people. And when you have that, you gain more commitment and performance from others. A good example of that is a couple years ago, I was at Tesla, and everybody was completely committed to the cause and to what they were trying to do at Tesla in California. And they actually told me they know that they make a lot less than all the other factories in the area. And I thought that was really interesting. And what had happened is they really had this strong motivation from their leader, who actually is in the news a lot, like him or not, you know, it's up to you what you think about him. But this Tesla's mission is to accelerate the world's transition into sustainable energy, right? And when that's what people believe in, they just believe I'm making the place a better place to be. I'm making the world a better place to be, right? And so people sign on to that. I heard something similar with Legos. Like Legos mission statement is, we create the builders of tomorrow, you know, and then they talk about how they unleash the creativity of kids, you know. This kind of thing is around inspirational motivation. The third piece is around intellectual stimulation. This has to do more with like creativity, problem solving, and taking calculated risks, things like that. And I will say the fourth one, this individualized consideration, is the reason I have it fourth, is it's the most often overlooked and not used. And it has to do with different coaching different people, helping people along. Because a lot of times when you're envisioning things, you don't go back and you don't see, is everybody okay? So do you actually know what's driving people, what's motivating people, even people on your team, even people you're working with? What's keeping them up at night, you know? Yeah. And listening to them, and, you know, providing explicit guidance, things like that. And so to truly equip the people for transition, when you have this approach, actually, it's quite strong.
Great, thank you so much. Let's just flip the other way. What are the biggest mistakes, or the biggest mistake? Maybe we just make it one, because I think sometimes we can learn lessons from the mistakes that other people make. What are the biggest mistakes you see leaders make during times of transformation that we should all strive to avoid?
Yeah, I mean, that's another great question. I think it's an inflexibility that comes upon people when they have to lead, and they have to, a good example that I can think of is, I had a former boss, and I won't mention his name, but he had one leadership style, and he always used it, whether it was good times, bad times. And the funny thing is, even when we were golfing, he actually always just used the same club. It was a 6-iron. He would tee off with the 6-iron. He would putt. He would get out of the sand with the 6-iron. And I actually equated that to, I would make fun of him back then. It's like, you know, that's kind of like what I see, and I would coach him in real time. We have that kind of relationship. But I see two extremes going on. One, people get overly driven, and the other one, sometimes people withdraw. But the most successful thing that I've seen people do, so the mistake is getting overly rigid on just the style that's most comfortable for you.
Right.
Best thing I've seen is when there's 6 main areas that I think when people can flex from a leadership perspective, in these areas, it's quite strong. And the first one I mentioned a minute ago, I noticed, like, when you can truly set the pace and really like roll up your sleeves and become and understand, okay, that's a leadership style that I need to flex and to use in this moment, right? The second one is around unifying. How do I unify people?
Yep.
The third is around coaching. The fourth is more around command executive, which is exactly like it sounds. Sometimes that's needed. Then envisioning, and then finally democratic. And the best, going further on this golf analogy, it's really interesting. Whenever you even think of it from like an emotional intelligence standpoint, and you think of a golfer, for example, when they're golfing, they know which club to pull out to use in certain environments, like because the ball's laid a certain way. So they don't tee off with a putter, they grab a driver and they putt with a putter. So the leaders who can actually maybe take each one of these 6 as almost like a club and say, okay, I assess the situation, I know what's going on, and now I need to use this club to get out of this situation. And an example I can think of, I love history. So in August of '43, when JFK, his boat, it was a torpedo boat, and it got kind of blown apart in the middle of the South Pacific. A Japanese destroyer ripped right through it. A couple of the guys passed away, but he was a lieutenant of that boat. He was in charge, right? But he grew up as a Harvard swimmer. He was very democratic, very nice. He was always well-liked. but he was not command executive at all. So they were floating in the middle of the South Pacific, and somebody said, "Lieutenant, what should we do?" And JFK was like, "What do you guys want to do? What do you guys think?" They were like, "Lieutenant, tell us what to do," right? So he said, "Swim to that island." And 3 of the people didn't know how to swim. So he had to drag them and take them along with them. But he pulled the right club out of his bag at the right time, which was command executive. It was not the Democratic club in that moment, to take the analogy further. So probably a little bit of a long-winded answer, but that's what I see when people can flex and be able to pull out the right type of leadership at the right time.
Yeah, I think that 2020 challenged us, right? Because we were thrown into something that we hadn't experienced before, maybe didn't even know if the tools or the clubs that we had in our tool chest, right? Like I joked with the folks that I work with at Avaap that I feel like we're out trailblazing, and it's like we're chopping trees down through the Amazon, but I'm not 100% sure what's on the other side, and I'm not 100% sure what's going to be coming down the pike, but having to be confident and adapting my leadership style to help get us through the channel. Right.
Yeah.
And being prepared for all the unknowns that we just didn't even know what was going to come up next. Right. And a lot of leaders, I think, are very tired. And one of the things that I've been encouraging leaders to do is you gotta slow down and take a strategic pause. You need to, even for yourself, right? Like making the time to get out and break away from the camera, to go out and take a lunch break, to take a walk, to do things that are important for the leader to help. But I think that your kind of assessment that the biggest mistake that leaders can make is being really rigid in their approach, and the way to counteract that is to be more flexible in how you approach things.
I love your example because it even shows a certain bravery that you have, right? I mean, for some people, being a command executive may be quite easy, but for others, it may be like extremely hard. Like if you're like, I am a little bit more harmonizing in nature. So to me, to be command executive, I have this natural feeling that people may get offended by what I'm saying, but there's a time that you need it. You have to use it. So you have to be able to pull. My daughter works at the Walt Disney World company. So I sometimes I read Walt Disney books, and I like this one thing Walt Disney said, that if you're not showing courage, you're not leading. So you should be challenged every day. If you're not challenged every day on something, you're probably just pulling out the same style and using it all the time. And so I kind of go by that.
Thank you. Well, I only have one more question, and then Vanessa will come out to you and see if we've had any questions come in from folks. But I know, just kind of thinking about practical steps, I know I'm a firm believer, and I know that through our conversations and our work together, that you share this perspective that leaders lead from wherever they are, regardless of what their job title is, or whether it's a formal role or an informal role, that we all lead by our actions and the things that we choose to do day in and day out. And I know we have many folks that are on the call, and the folks who have registered who will be listening to this after today, many of them are project team members, or they're project managers or program managers, or maybe they're change management, organizational change management practitioners. So what advice do you have for them on how to work with their senior leaders or their sponsors of projects to help drive transformation and to help drive their change initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, actually. And we have kind of a long history of looking at that, like even well over, I think over 15 years ago, we noticed this has been an ongoing problem, right? That this is a challenge. And we even had some people who keep a project going way too long, and it ends up getting killed anyway, and it ends up not working, but people even knew it beforehand, but it can be quite challenging, to deal with in the moment. So we actually, through really investigating this question and really working with it, we came up with a model here that is kind of tried and true, and we just really go by it, and it's helped in those relationships. And then how we found that out is, well, let me just back up and say the reason we started working with this model is we did multiple interviews of these leaders and people on projects to see what did they like, what didn't they like. And we call it the sell and guide model, because you're kind of selling, the solution that you're working on, and, and you're guiding. So maybe I'll just go into what that is a little bit and how that works. The first is S, which is around solution. So really it's all about like even doing a double back and double checking your solution, because I know it may be challenging and sometimes even scary, but the question is it the right solution? Does it still work? Because the best strategies anymore are sometimes even like moving and whitewater, but sometimes we can overly adhere to a solution, or maybe it needs tweaked, or maybe the timeline needs bumped, things like that, right? But sometimes it's like, no, we agreed to this, we're going to work with this. But I found that when you have that S piece, that solution part, and really can talk to the people around you about it, it's extremely helpful. The second one is around expertise, and really coming across as the expert, really around the acumen of this whole thing. You know everything about the project, you kind of know what's going on, you know the players, you know what's going, and can actually help with that. In my early days, I was actually a buyer in an automotive company, and then a lawn and turf company, and I used to have to buy tires and rims and things like that. And I remember this old wise buyer who said to me, "Do you even know what you're buying? Do you know what the bolt pattern is? Do you know what the wear of the tire is? Do you know?" And so they said, that's why you're not getting respect from the engineering department, because you're not actually showing an expertise when you're working with these people, right? And so I started even like taking everything I bought, whether it was bearings or belts, things like this, I actually really started to understand like what's the Kevlar in it, what's made. So this is something I found you can go too extreme with that. Like you don't have to actually know all the answers, but it's good to have an expertise, right? The next one is around, the first L is around listening. And this might sound quite simple, but I actually had a friend his grandma used to say, you should listen with your eyes. And I found at the time I didn't understand that, but now I very much do. But to truly listen and care about the people around you, right? And so when you're working with the folks around you, the leaders, the project owners, they know if you care, right? And so sometimes we have to take a step back, slow down, even understand, even personally, if there's something going on in their lives, people really, really relate to that, and they really know that you care. And then when you mention something about, hey, how is this going for you? I heard that, you had this going on in your life. Is everything going on? That it just is very helpful. The next letter L is around lead. So to truly lead. So how do you become a leader as well? And you might say, well, I'm not the leader, I'm doing this job, I have a piece of it. But even when you have a piece that you own, you're still leading, and you can show leadership behavior, like even getting the right people involved or challenging the status quo, saying, are you sure? Calling time out when you need to, or even, coaching, like coaching others around you. And then the last one is around guide. It's basically the project plan. And I know the best project planners in the world have a certain pad in their dates, which is exactly what you want. They know what's due when, and what needs to be done, what timelines are going to be missing, things like this. When you have this level of certainty and you can even share it in a simple way, I found that credibility really comes strong to you. So these are just 5. Just an easy way to remember it is sell and guide. And what we did notice is every time you showed all 5 of these, the people who were on the other side of the project, or let's say the customer, in every case, they said they loved it, they would do it again, it was a great experience. And that's kind of how we came up with these.
Got it. So my takeaway is that whether you're the formal leader on the project, you're a project team member, that when we take a look at a solution, it's okay to take a step back if we need to adjust scope, timeline, schedule, how we're doing it. So not being overly rigidly married to the solution because we agreed on it at the beginning. It's okay to adjust and be agile. Bring your expertise, make sure you're demonstrating, don't be modest. That's something I know I talk a lot about is, modesty is, in my opinion, it's deceit, because you're not talking about, you're not showing up authentically with the goodness and the superpowers that you bring. Listening. Your grandma said, listen with your eyes. Mine used to say, you have 2 ears for a reason. So listen twice as much as you speak. Yeah, grandma was always like, you got 2 ears, you should be using them. Okay. So listen, and listen maybe for the things people aren't saying, and represent that on your projects. And leading, right? Being able to step in and willing to take those risks and to guide, to have that plan, that project, that structure, so people know that you know what you're doing and you're not winging it. So I really like that, because those are things we all can do from wherever we are, right, on a project.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sounds simple, but it's just, it pays huge dividends with the people around you. They just really appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, I think those are all the questions that I had. I really appreciate your time and sharing your perspective, and really their leadership lessons from the field, because this is what you do it day in and day out with your teams, working with senior leaders in their organizations as they are identifying emerging leaders, as they're helping their senior leadership team to identify blind spots and fill the gaps. And so if you do have any questions, you can enter them into the chat, or you can, I think there's a QA function. Definitely join us next week, where Chad and I will actually do a little bit of a deeper dive on these concepts of transformational leadership and learning agility in context of organizations and projects. So Vanessa, I'm just going to ask if we've had any questions come in for Chad while we've been on the call.
Yeah. Thank you both. That was an amazing session. Really great to hear from both of you. We did have a few questions come in, but like Shannan said, feel free to keep them coming through the Q&A box or the chat function. So this first question says, what can a leader start doing today that can make an immediate impact on their journey to transformational leadership?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I could take that one. I think it has something to do with really educating yourself and really getting it deep down within you, right? Because there's so much going on now. You have so many responsibilities, things on your plate, both professionally, personally, and really understanding, what do I mean by what does transformational leadership mean to me? I mean, the reason there's literally, I guess, millions of leadership books is there's not one way to do it. And I guess if you talk to several people about transformational leadership, it would make a very, very nice discussion, because these 4 I's that they wrote about and that I talked about today, there's even best practices on the best way to do that. Like for you to handle those certain situations, like how do you coach? How do you coach up? How do you coach to the side? How do you coach down? And so I think it starts with really understanding the topic, of transformational leadership. What does it mean to me? Because last year, when you look at COVID and let's say something extreme happened, and then you looked in your toolbox and you're trying to pull out this tool to use and there's nothing there, right? If you felt that, then it's like, oh, make a note of it and maybe, read about it and understand. And I would say with these 4 I's, to even I wouldn't even recommend a book for each one of the I's, but there's several books that maybe whenever you start to look at it and Google search for yourself, what fits the best for you when it comes to motivating others? What is your style? You know, some people are a little bit, you know how it is, you know, there's many ways of motivating, and there's not one way. But I think it starts with reading and educating yourself and getting it in your toolbox, you know, how you want to show up.
Yeah, I think Chad and I have had some really good conversations over the last couple months, and I think part of it starts with self-awareness. And you said something that I think is super important. It's that we all have a style. I often talk about how do you show up when you're, you know, on your balcony, you know, your absolute best, and how do you show up when maybe you're in your basement and you're not necessarily bringing the best to the forefront. I think it's important to understand both. I'm a big believer in Gallup Strength Finder, and operating from your strengths, and know what your strengths are and bring them to the table. But it's also important to know our blind spots. We just recently on our team, we just recently did a culture workshop using DISC. I'd never done DISC before, and all of my team members predicted that I would show up as a D. I didn't even know what that meant. And then I started reading it, and I'm like, oh, I'm a little bossy. So I might sit in my command and control, or what you call it, command execution, you know, might be my natural place, and I have to work to be a little bit more collaborative. So I think self-awareness is a really good, you know, so many different personality tests out there, Myers-Briggs, DISC, just knowing what your style is and knowing where you go for what's comfortable. So when you're in times of discomfort, you can, you know, be thoughtful and deliberate.
Great, thank you. That's a great segue into the second question. I think our final question of the day that came in, and it asks, how has your personal leadership style been impacted by working remotely?
Well, Shannon, before the call started, we were talking about which suit we would wear when we eventually show up somewhere again.
Yeah, my clothing style has changed dramatically.
Yeah, mine too.
So let me take that first, and then Chad, I'll come over to you. I think one of the big things, right, starts with self-awareness. I personally am a bit more of an introvert, right? So when I'm not on the road, even when I'm on the road, I have a lot of downtime in airports and, you know, hotel rooms and things like that. And being in a remote capacity, in my head when we started, I thought that it would be an introvert's dream. In actuality, I think it was much harder to make that transition, because I had to be on even more, being on camera, learning to get comfortable with being on camera, paying attention to the nonverbals in people's tones of voice. And I think for me, I'm not much of a chit chatter. I don't find comfort in that. Whereas Chad, who's a, you know, diehard extrovert, great, chit chat is kind of his thing, because he gets to know people. I've had to learn that I don't have to launch straight into the work in meetings, but to humanize it and talk about, you know, people's life and get to know people. So those are things that I had to, and making time for myself, right? Like at least once a week, I take myself to lunch by myself. That is an introvert's dream, by the way, by myself, not talking to anybody, but just an hour where I go and I just sit and I, you know, decompress, and then I don't know, I'm better for it if I just make that time. Chad, what have you learned about your leadership style in a remote environment?
I mean, I actually thought I was a pretty good listener, and I found out that I am not as good as I thought. And so I had to really heighten my listening skills and be really putting myself into people's shoes. Like I started getting some comments from the team and from customers that 8 hours on Zoom, a Zoom call, is tiring.
Yep.
And so for me, the way I am, I'm like, you know, it's just, yeah, I mean, it's maybe it's not, maybe it is, I don't know. And then I actually went in and did a little bit of research and found that there's 3 main reasons that people actually it's true that people do get tired. The first one is that people are always on. And so when you're in person, you can look down at someone's, you can look at your shoes, you can look over, but here you got to constantly be on. And the second one was that our lips are a little bit off. So you have to pay more attention to actually the way, you know, what you're hearing and timing it up to make sure you got the message. And the third was, it's a funny one. It cracks me up. It's about the selfie. Like, it's tiring because people are constantly checking how they're coming across and like what they're looking. And you might even see them like fix their hair once in a while. You don't have to worry about that when you're, you know, in person. And that's just a funny example for how at first I shrugged it off and was like, you know, 8-hour programs on Zoom is fine. But actually there's research showing that it's not. And I think it made me really have to listen deeper and understand some of that and really, really put myself into the shoes of others.
Yep.
You know, I tend to look at things through sometimes my lens, like, hey, I can do anything. Like if I can do it, you can do it, or if you can do it, I can do it. But it's not necessarily like that during these tough times. So
yeah, that ability to swivel and to really see things through other people's lens, I think it's super important. So, well, thank you. Chad, thank you so much for joining us today. Vanessa, just a real quick check. Did we have any other questions that come in?
No, looks like that was the end of the questions. If you do have any more questions, definitely feel free to email Chad and Shannon. And I know Abby from our team just dropped both of their LinkedIn profiles into the chat. So definitely connect with them that way as well. And just want to do one more plug for our session next week. We hope to see you all there. So thanks again, Chad and Shannon. This was great.
Great. Thank you so much, Chad. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining.